this is Kim Ki-won from Richgo. Today, with the state of emergency starting and the data for the second week of December being released, I will discuss the market based on this information. Looking at Seoul, it seems that short-term fluctuations have finally begun. So, there is a possibility that things might improve a bit in the short term, which is confirmed by the current data. In 2025, the real estate market may crash later with slight early improvements. Since mid-December, Seoul shows fewer sellers, more buyers, hinting improvement. Seasonal factors matter. In 2021, demand rose after bottoming in December. I mentioned that early 2025 might see some improvement, and trends are gradually appearing since mid-December. Currently in Seoul, the number of sellers has decreased slightly, while buying demand has increased a bit, causing the demand trend graph to rise. This suggests a slight improvement overall. Seasonal factors are at play. In 2021, the market bottomed in early to mid-December, with demand fluctuating but gradually rising. In 2022, a low point occurred at the end of November, followed by recovery. As you can see, the number of sellers has decreased a bit, while the buying demand has slightly increased. This has caused the bar graph showing the buying and selling demand trend in Seoul to rise. So, we might think that the overall direction is improving a little. However, there are some seasonal characteristics to consider. If you look back to 2021, the market hit a bottom around early to mid-December. And what happened to the demand? It fluctuated a bit, but started to rise gradually. So, it was somewhat stable until around March or April. In 2022, we saw a low point in late November, followed by signs of recovery. By the end of 2023, around early December, the market found its bottom and began to rise. Now in mid-December, it seems we might be finding the bottom again, with potential improvements in the coming months. This suggests positive changes in the first half of 2025. So this time, it's mid-December. We might be at the bottom, with potential improvements in the coming months. Early 2025 may see slight gains. Key is Trump's January 6, 2025 statements and their impact on Korea. This is crucial. Early 2025 improvements depend on Trump. The latter half looks risky. But the key issue is what Trump will say when he takes office on January 6, 2025, and how that will impact the Korean market. I think this is a very important point. So, whether the first half of 2025 shows more signs of improvement really depends on Trump's statements. That's my judgment. However, the second half is looking very risky right now. But the second half is looking very risky right now. That's what I'm seeing. So the demand for Johns has also gone up a bit. So is it that not just buying and selling, but also the Johns market in Seoul is starting to improve a bit? Are we finding bottom? I see this happening, and I believe it could be possible. Also, starting in January 2025, there will be special provisions for new leases, right? With income deductions and income limits increasing, and with policy funds being released, it seems like the first half of the year might show some upward movement. Now, looking at Gyeonggi province, it seems to have gone up a bit too, right? So Gyeonggi province is also moving slightly in a similar way to the metropolitan area. In fact, we saw this pattern in 2021, 2022, and 2023, where we found a bottom around the end of the year. When exactly did we see that bottom? Right around December, we tend to find a bottom, and from mid to late December into January, the supply and demand start to improve a bit. Then, around January or February, trading tends to pick up again. I believe this pattern could repeat in 2025. And the only area, the metropolitan region, that is still declining is Incheon. As you can see, the supply and demand in Incheon keeps declining. Both buying and Johns prices in Incheon are still declining, while Gyeonggi and Seoul have seen some rebounds. Incheon continues to head in a negative direction. Now, when we look at this flower chart, we can see that Ulsan has moved quite a bit to the right. In other words, the buying and selling demand in Ulsan has improved significantly. So, you can see that the media has become quite strong right. The demand for Jeonse is still solid. So, since Ulsan is one of the most solid areas in the country, and the Jeonse market is consistently stable, I believe that even if there is a downward trend, in 2025, Ulsan will be one of the regions with strong downward rigidity. I think you can look at Ulsan positively. Now, how about Cheongbuk? So, I think it's okay to look at Ulsan positively. So how about Cheongbuk? Is the Jeonse demand in Cheongbuk still improving? And the buying and selling demand is pretty much stable, while in Jeonbuk, the Jeonse demand is starting to rise again and is improving. On the other hand, in Jeonnam and Gangwon-do, the situation is quite the opposite, as they are going down significantly. Yes, the demand for Jeonse is quite deteriorating, which suggests that the Jeonse market could become a bit unstable. Fortunately, Daegu and Sejong both on the rise now. So, in the case of Daegu, the Jeonse demand is steadily increasing, but the buying and selling market hasn't seen any major changes yet. In Sejong, the demand for Jeonse is improving again. So, in the case of Daegu and Sejong, when the JONS demand rises to 100% and then up to around 120 or 130, that's when we might start to see some positive changes in the buying and selling market. You can think of that as the starting point for potential improvements. However, we can still see that while the direction is improving a bit, the markets in Daegu and Sejong are still quite weak. Now, looking at Busan, Cheongnam, and Daejeon, they are all moving down and to the left. So, while the direction is improving a bit, we can still see that the markets in Daegu and Sejong are quite weak. So, Busan, Cheongnam, Daejeon are all moving down and to the left. It's not improving. In Gyeongnam and the other regions, things are pretty much stable. So for this week, the most noteworthy thing is that Seoul and Gyeonggi are trying to stabilize a bit and improve since it's October. It won't be a strong market yet, but I think it should be okay for the first half of next year. Also in Ulsan, we can see that the buying and selling market is starting to come back to life a bit. Now let's look at the transaction trends instead of just the supply and demand. Because if the supply is improving, but the transaction volume isn't increasing, that's not a good sign. If transactions aren't really picking up, then that means the market energy isn't very strong. In Seoul, there's almost no change, right? There's hardly any change at all. So this means that the market energy isn't very strong, right? In Seoul, there's almost no change at all, is there? There's almost no change. So looking at this, the transaction trends seem to be improving starting around January or February. This is true for both 2023 and 2024. So if there are changes in the market next year, I think the transaction trends will likely improve again in January and February of 2024. So while we might see another upward trend, I don't think we'll have as hot a transaction trend as we did in 2024. And the JONS transactions still haven't increased. So in the case of Gyeonggi-do, there's almost no change. Right. There's almost no change in the transaction volume for buying and selling or JONSI. In the case of Incheon, since it has moved quite a bit to the left, the transactions have decreased even more. There's hardly any change in the JONS market. So, it looks like the transactions aren't really increasing yet, but I mentioned that things could change in January. Now, in the case of Cheongbuk, transactions have increased a bit compared to last week, but transactions are still gradually decreasing. Next, Gyeongbuk is doing well. So, in the upper right, both buying and JONS transactions have increased a bit, but in other regions like Gwangju and Gangwon, places like Busan, Daegu and Jeonbuk are all moving down and to the left. In other words, both buying and JONSI are in a bad situation right now. Looking at this data, there still aren't any signs that transactions are really coming back to life. In other words, both buying and JONS are currently in a bad situation. So looking at this data, there still aren't any signs. Transactions are really coming back to life. In the case of Ulsan, things are looking a bit positive as transactions decreased but are now recovering. Especially for JONS transactions, the trend looks really good. As expected, Ulsan is still moving quite solidly compared to the rest of the country when we look at these transaction trends and supply-demand dynamics. This has been confirmed, and if there is a nationwide shock in the second half of 2025, Ulsan might also experience some significant adjustments at that time. As expected, Ulsan is moving very steadily compared to the rest of the country when looking at transaction trends and supply and demand trends. This is being confirmed, and if a nationwide shock comes in the second half of Watch-Volume 2025, Ulsan may also undergo significant adjustments at that time. When that time comes, it might be the best opportunity to buy a home in Ulsan. And not just in Ulsan, but many undervalued regions are likely to present the best buying opportunities around late 2025 to early 2026. So I think it would be great if you continue to follow RichgoTV, which is based on data. Also, I hope you all make good use of the Richgo app or the Richgo PC site on your phones or computers to help you with wise real estate, investments, and finding your own home. Thank you. Thank you.